After all I've done, sacrificed to find out, it never really mattered.
I know we have had some really good sci-fi drama shows over the last decade, but few have matched up to the legacy of Silo. The TV series based on the Silo trilogy novels by Hugh Howey tells a story that immediately grabs your attention, and the showrunner Graham Yost explores this dystopian future in a way that everything seems uncomfortably real. Now we are into the third season, and yet the charm of the show is far from over. Maybe it has something to do with the immersive world building, where a subterranean society is brought to life with crazy detailing. Maybe it is just the intelligent storytelling. But ultimately it all works, and the show remains a fan favorite. In this video, I will take you through the entire lore of Silo, and for those who are looking to dive into this epic saga, this might be a great introduction to start things off. Prelude, the fall of civilization and the birth of the Silo Project. So, what's the story all about? The premise is rather bizarre, and it is something that immediately gets you hooked on. It's a dystopian future where a community of 10,000 people lives in a giant silo that extends 144 levels underground. It's a society that is strictly bound by regulations that people are led into thinking is for their own good and protection. One of the first questions that come to mind is what would have been that particular event that would have forced humanity to be pushed into underground compounds? Was it a post-apocalyptic world? Was it a zombie invasion? Or was it a giant wave that decided to destroy everything on land and forced people to move underground? Or was it all a hoax? Lies to keep people enclosed in the silos as prisoners and create communities where humans could be ruled upon and controlled on the basis of certain beliefs? Well, it might sound all complicated, but then there are things about the silo that you really want to know. So after the first few books that consist of the primary storyline for Silo, Hugh Howey decided to take us on a journey that put us through what happened before the silo was created. The year is 2049, yeah, but it is not all neon like Blade Runner would have suggested. In fact, it all seems pretty much the same, down to the very world where conspiracy theories and governing bodies exist. Donald Keene, a newly elected congressman, is appointed by Senator Paul Thurman to be a part of a project that is very much based on architectural design that Donald had worked on back when he was studying architecture. In fact, there's a funny remark he makes about how he didn't really like his subject and decided to jump into government. I figured I could do more good governing people than I could drawing boxes to put them in. This is a clear reference to how much Donald's character arc will change through the narrative. Anyway, Donald was appointed along with his friend and congressman Mick Webb, the senator's daughter, and Donald's ex, Anna Thurman. The trio were heading the project that would design the silos that Donald had originally planned to be structures that would be built on land for keeping nuclear waste. But this time around, they were being built as one of those measures, the means to build a place for after something that would probably make the world uninhabitable. So now you have context regarding the ones responsible for the building of the silos, but the real question still remains. Why was it being built in the first place? Once we cover that, we can then get into the whole building process and all the other things that came with it. The quick answer is that 2049 was not exactly a great time for humanity. There were plenty of weapons that carried deadly side effects if they went wrong, but one that found its way through was the nanobots. It all goes back to 2007, a year that would be two major developments that would completely change the Hugh Howey's world of silos. In 2007, the Center for Automation in Nanobiotech paved the way for robots, tiny enough not to be visible to the naked eye, to be used to conduct repairs and self-propagate, and even to diagnose various medical issues. At the same time, CBS aired a rerun of a program that talked about how the effects of propanol could help individuals with extreme trauma to wipe out the memory of the traumatic event. This would be marked as the event that would contribute towards creating the ultimate weapon against humanity and, at the same time, ensure that the event would be entirely forgotten. Now that the nanobots created the chance of being one of the biggest weapons in history, Senator Paul Thurman decided to devise the World Order Operation 50. Abbreviated as WOOL, it is an operation that would be based on the idea of providing humans with a second chance if human civilization faced destruction by the weaponization of the nanobots. While Donald is somewhat unclear about the project, over time he realizes that the project was in response to the development of weapons of destruction based on nanotechnology. His perspective regarding the entire ordeal changes. He is tasked with designing the silo that will then serve as the safety net for the CAD-FAC, which stands for the Containment and Disposal Facility. But each time, his interactions with people around him push him into the details that surely indicate that there's a lot that's intended to happen and can go wrong, and hence increase the stake of the project. By 2052, the CAD-FAC project will have finished with the completion of the facilities, and at the same time, the world will have become a bit more unsafe. Important people from across the nation attended the Democratic National Convention that was held in Atlanta. Donald and Thurman were also in attendance, but right then the absolutely unthinkable happened. Nuclear bombs destroyed Atlanta, destroying the entire region and the key figures associated with the silos, including Thurman, Anna, and Keene himself, who were rushed into the underground facility. It would be then that Donald would discover the true purpose of the silo, a bastion of humanity, something that was kept from him this entire time. As a consequence of this, all things on land had turned into a deadly wasteland, and it was completely uninhabitable. Also, the new enemy, the nanobots, could wipe out life entirely. It was like if someone survived the blast, they would eventually be killed by the nanobots. The only true survivors would live in the silos that had been created to safeguard the remains of humanity from the outside world. But things are not so simple after all. I mean, it is worth thinking how the timing of developing the silo was just about perfectly synced with the time of the explosions. As it turns out, the explosion was the handiwork of Senator Thurman, and this was intended to force the people inside the silo. It was all a part of a plan, and yes, you can draw parallels with the whole Noah's Ark story here. But this is also the beginning of the problems, because things can go horribly wrong when people start assuming that they are gods. Ultimately, it is always the human lives at stake when someone tries to play God. Establishing order, the early years of the Silo Society. Now that the surviving humanity had managed to secure themselves in the silos, there was a properly planned layout in these silos in order to be sure how each silo functioned. Now I'm going to take you into the depths of the silo system and how there's a difference between certain silos and their purpose. You will also understand certain details that will slowly start the next chapter of stories based inside the silos. In total, there are 50 silos that have been designed based on the structures that Donald Keene had planned, and each one has a similar structure with 144 levels and is embedded miles beneath the Earth's surface. Each silo supports a generation of humans, ensuring everything from their housing to making sure they survive over a period of time. If you have watched the series, I am sure you remember that there was something peculiar about a division between the floors of this structure, with each floor having a certain crowd of people associated with a certain labor. While the lower levels had people who could be attributed to the lower caste, the upper levels had people who belonged to the upper caste and held themselves higher than the others. Even the workforce was different for each of them, as the lower level people had more manual work associated with the waste from the other levels. However, the upper levels mostly had IT-based work, and other authority figures oversaw this subterranean structure. This division becomes a lot more visible in the series when we see Mayor Jans going to the lower levels. But one has to note that each level is tasked with something that is somehow linked with the survival inside the silo. But I think that the most unique among the silos is Silo 1, the central control silo that inhabits some of the key figures from before the events of the destruction that took place on land. People like Donald Keene, Senator Thurman, and other high-ranking officials are kept here. The people in the other silos live and die, but here in Silo 1, people are kept in a manner where they are put in and out of cryogenic sleep in shifts every few decades in order to ensure that their leadership is consistent over the centuries. These individuals oversee the events of the other silos and maintain order by preserving the rules that they have created under the Pact, which is a book. Remember Juliet having a difficult time going through that boring book in the series? That's the book we are talking about here. Now, apart from controlling and overseeing, Silo 1 has authority that allows them to control and manipulate events inside the other silos. One of the primary responsibilities of this silo is to ensure that there is no notoriety in the other silos, and in case of any such scenario, they can reset the silo entirely. They can wipe out the life inside the silo by using poison gas, thus preventing any chances of catastrophic failure or rebellion. While the other silos had work divided on the basis of caste and class divisions amongst the levels, Silo 1 has mostly work oriented towards leadership, research, and technology. The people inside Silo 1 are superior since they bear the knowledge regarding the outside world and even the true purpose of the silos. These silos have not been designed to save humanity and preserve them, but it's also about eliminating the dangers posed by the nanotechnology and the nuclear weapons. The nanobots are to be weaponized through the silos, even though they were developed primarily for medical advancements. Yeah, there's a lot about the nanobots that will come up sometime soon in the series. But you might wonder, why is this information kept from the other people in the other silos? Well, it is in order to ensure a better life and not give them any means to get ideas of their own. Yes, that's some major gaslighting right there. In fact, I believe the entire world of the silo works a lot on the concept of gaslighting people. Another major difference between the silos and Silo 1 is something very obvious that viewers might have wondered about while watching it. All that technology is inside the silo, and yet people are forced to climb up and down, something that must take a lot of time from their lives. In fact, I also wondered about that when I first witnessed things in the series, but then it turns out Silo 1 has a lift. Yes, those people who consider themselves to be the gods to the people in the other silos have basically kept the best stuff for themselves, ensuring that all these people have to go up and down using the lift. Was it to ensure that people did not get lazy with the lift and travel smoothly between the levels based on their requirements? Maybe. However, the reason that becomes clear as you jump deeper into the lore is that the lack of a lift prevents communication between the different levels. Remember how information about someone's demise and other major events didn't travel between the levels until it was talked about by someone to another person on a different level? Yes, it ensured that things remained slow, and that if something did come up, people would be able to communicate that between each level. Yeah, that is surely some creepy way of maintaining control over people. Fearing that people would come together and share ideas and common thoughts and dreams and thus preventing chances of that happening is clearly a major manipulative move. Also, it is worth noting here that each silo has an IT department, and it has a great importance. It maintains the communication with other silos, and this is a crucial aspect of this life. Another disturbing tool to control the population is the use of a birth control method, where a particular apparatus is placed inside a woman to prevent her from reproducing. Not only that, in the twisted world of silos, two people cannot just be in a normal relationship by their free will. They need to get it sanctioned so that they can continue to be in the relationship. The Great Uprisings and Resistance Movements. Now that you have an idea of how truly cruel the power dynamics between each of the silos was, you must wonder, how did this system persist? Well, this is what brings me to the next chapter of the story. Over the years, certain silos became a place of unrest, and that is very well indicated by the various measures that were laid down in order to prevent any sort of normal societal mannerisms. The one flaw that persisted in this system was the human condition, the one thing that can change the entire system in a single move. Every few decades, one silo or the other would undergo an internal revolution that would be further developed by the idea that the world that they were living in was an illusion, an artificial control designed by some powerful people. And they were not wrong about it, only they did not have any idea how horrible and to what level this entire plan was elaborately constructed to isolate the people inside each silo. As I said, Silo 1 would reset the silos with this rebellion. Resetting involved killing most of the population in these silos and reducing the population to a fraction of itself. The survivors would then be given amnesia-inducing medication that would prevent them from keeping any of their memories from their past lives. Even the IT systems were completely cleaned up, and later the silo would be started again, and it would appear as if the rebellion never really happened. I have never imagined a worse form of authoritarianism than the one shown in this series. One of the primary questions that a human has always wanted an answer to is his purpose. This question has paved the way for every kind of discovery that we have seen over the years, and even though it might take 1 billion years to get this answer, the striving for the answer never really stops. The same thing happened inside the silos as they became places of forgetfulness and loss. While the purpose may have been to preserve this population, it instead became a place where the inhabitants were born and they would die without ever really knowing the true purpose of existence. And each time one would try to seek that answer, they would be killed off for the greater good. But by 2212, the cracks in the system were becoming more apparent, and the efforts to seek answers were more widespread. The places kept for saving humanity had become prisons for most humans, and the larger number of rebellions indicated how fragile the entire system actually was. A cluster of 11 silos, majorly led by Silo 40, decide to sever their contact with Silo 1 and jammed the termination signal that could allow Silo 1 to remotely operate over them. So Silo 1 is forced to completely demolish most of those silos, and they decide to take some extreme measures with the other silos too. During this period, Silo 18, where our protagonist from the series, Juliet Nichols, comes from, is also under a rebellion. Victor, one of the key conspirators behind Operation 50, commits suicide, and this forces Thurman to bring back Donald to work on a solution. Otherwise, their whole plan would fail. Victor was someone who had worked on nanotechnology and was aware of the intentions of the other countries in using them to wipe human life from the planet, and thus he had really pushed for Operation 50 to Thurman. Now, Donald didn't really want to get involved in the entire ordeal, as he hated what he had become a part of, but he had to comply considering saving the silos meant saving humanity. As the rebellion inside Silo 18 grows further, they plan the severe actions that they might have to take in order to prevent the events from ruining the chances of the plans of Silo 1. But eventually they find out that a woman named Mrs. Crow had some knowledge of the time before people were brought into the silos, and she was using this knowledge to strike the rebellion amongst the people. So Silo 18 undergoes a resetting instead of complete decimation, a move that would eventually be for the better, as 130 years later, this very silo gives rise to an individual who would change the fate of the surviving human population. At the same time, something completely different ended up happening with their neighboring silo, Silo 17, as in 2312 they would decidedly undergo a rebellion that would prove to be catastrophic, with the entire population being killed off. The only survivor would be Jimmy, a kid who was put into a safe space with food and other survival measures by his parents. His father worked in IT, so he had some idea about the plans that Silo 1 had for their silo, and hence he wanted to save his family. However, circumstances, particularly ones where everyone was fighting for a chance to survive the events inside the silo, forced them to also die, and only Jimmy survived. Realizing that he was the only one who had survived, Jimmy started calling himself Solo and made himself home inside the server room. Soon he started to get used to the food and manners required to endure this for years, and he was the only one to have survived in the entire silo. He even started to think that there is no chance for him to have any human interaction, but he was wrong. The world was about to change for these individuals, and a complete stranger would pay him a visit very shortly. By the way, we did get a glance at Solo in the first episode of the second season of Silo, played by Steve Zahn. The rise of Juliet and the era of change. Remember the events of resetting the Silo 18, something that prevented any chance of the rebellion or any associations with it? Well, most of the things happened somewhat similar to the series, except Juliet would become an essential figure about 130 years after the rebellion, something that would be seen from a completely different perspective by the new generation of people since the resetting. The series changes the time period to 140 years, and maybe they have something interesting in their plans to extend it by 10 years. Or maybe they are just poking at Hugh Howey, like how Kubrick used to with Stephen King. Anyway, getting back to the honest adaptation angle of the series, as it picks up most of the arc of Juliet in a rather similar manner. But you have to understand here that there are some fundamental differences between the book and the series. One of them is regarding the syndrome, which is a rather interesting story arc brought into the series. It is a disease that runs among the inhabitants of the silo, and I love how this offers a fresh take into the crisis. I mean, it is only normal for them to fall sick given how they live in complete absence of sunlight and many other essential factors available on land. The other thing that is unique to the series is the Flamekeepers, as they are brought in as individuals who had memories of the before time through relics that they owned. It is an interesting concept that might prove to be rather essential later in the series, and there's a version of this that exists in the books but is not given any major significance as such. Now we come back to Juliet, the individual who would change things forever in the pre-existing system of the silos. Ever since she was a child, Juliet had been aware of the oppressive nature of the authorities in the silo, and she intended to work towards uncovering the truth. Every time she managed to lose focus on this particular interest, something or the other would bring her right back to it. Meanwhile, Silo 18 itself had some seriously rigid rules that prevented people from keeping relics of the pre-rebellion time and even engaging in such discussions. Those who wanted to go out of the silo were allowed to do so under the condition that they go out to clean, and even though they would initially reject the proposal, once outside they would always be seen clearing the sensors that showed the outside world to the people inside. Juliet comes from the down below, a mechanic, and even though her work is something that is looked down upon, it has importance to the entire silo's work. Even though Juliet takes a lot of pride in her work, she is dissatisfied with the authorities and the limitations that are imposed on her. Over the years, interactions with a certain number of people lead her into believing that the suspicions about the world outside the silos must be true. She decides to dig deeper and, in the process, ends up being the sheriff of the silo after the previous sheriff, Holston Becker, nominates her based on their interaction. As Juliet goes deeper into the rabbit hole that is the conspiracy behind the silo, she also comes to terms with the measures that the authority figures would take just to cover up secrets. But her investigation brings her closer to the relics and the world outside, and it manages to uncover the workings that are behind ensuring the controlling tendencies of the silo. Upon realizing that she has gathered a certain amount of information, she is taken in by the authorities, and it is there that she is decidedly sent outside to clean. But something special happened in this case. Instead of the past few instances where the individuals who went out to clean died after cleaning the sensors for a while, all these people were sent out with a certain suit that would prevent them from being affected by the outside atmosphere along with a special visor, but they were not proper, hence leading to their demise. In the case of Juliet, she had some people help her out and get her suit properly insulated. So when she ends up heading out, even though she imagines it to be a journey of sure death, she manages to survive. Yes, someone who went outside the silo actually managed to survive, and she also ends up making some shocking discoveries. She sees that the visor actually shows a false video of lush green land, but to a certain distance, after which it shows the original ruins that she had always seen. If you think the people of Silo 18 watching it through the screen are the only ones who are aware of this, then you are clearly wrong. All of this transpires in the year 2345 back in Silo 1. The staff go and awaken Thurman based on the protocol, but mistakenly wake up Donald. Since most of the other individuals have had their memories wiped amongst the staff of Silo 1, no one really recognizes that it's Donald and not Thurman that they have woken up. Once awake, Donald is informed about the situation of Juliet traveling from Silo 18 to Silo 17, and the plans for decimating Silo 18 are laid out, because this would mark the first time someone had walked away from the silo, and hence those who had witnessed it would clearly cause a rebellion. But Donald decides to hold back and requests more information on Juliet. So, maybe there's hope after all in everything that is ready to unpack in this crazy story about the silos. Also, once Juliet ends up inside Silo 17, she meets up with Solo, and this duo has a lot planned up ahead. The Truth Unveiled, the world outside the silo. The fate of humanity and the leftover silos depends on the hands of the very few defiant ones, and at this point we will witness them coming together in order to end this saga. Donald continues to question the moral aspects of the actions he has taken, and tries to dig to get more information on Thurman's motives, with all the access he has gained after being woken up as Thurman. But it seems that he has fallen sick, and his health is continuously deteriorating, indicative of the lack of time he has to make things right. He makes another major discovery upon using Thurman's authority. The silos were never really intended to save humanity, as only one of them was supposed to resettle the world. Thurman plans to erase every single bit of information associated with nuclear weapons and the nanobots, and then on the E-Day in 2550, almost 500 years after the silos were inhabited, a silo would be picked using an algorithm and they will be allowed to go into the world. Meanwhile, everyone else in the other silos would be allowed to kill. So Donald decides to prevent this logic in order to save all the other silos too. Juliet, on the other hand, comes across Solo and uncovers a lot more about the world outside, including the fact that there are actually a lot more silos than she has any idea about. Solo helps her use the server room through which she gets to contact her Silo 18, particularly Lucas. You might remember Lucas as the kid with whom Juliet almost had a fling. Well, there's a lot more to that story yet to come. Juliet finds out that the mechanical people of the Silo 18 had a rebellion after she had left, but Mayor Bernard finds out about Lucas and decides to send him outside to clean, only to be swapped and sent outside himself by Peter, the new sheriff. Juliet, on the other hand, prepares a way to save Lucas, but instead discovers that Bernard was incinerated in the cleansing fire. Lucas becomes the head of IT and Juliet is made the new mayor of the Silo 18. Yes, that's a lot of spoilers for the series, maybe, but there's a chance that showrunner Graham Yost might have a different plan for the series entirely. After all, we are well aware of how the shows often tend to stray away from the books, particularly in the case of the beloved series Game of Thrones. Anyway, getting back to the arc, Juliet used the server room to establish contact with Donald somehow. After uncovering the truth about the functioning of the silos, she had little to no reason to trust him. But then there's the idea of the greater good. The people of Silo 17 decide to take a whole new objective into their hands, using the mining machinery to dig a hole from their silo to Silo 18. Right around then, back in Silo 1, Thurman is awakened and he takes back control from Donald, who had been working as him and controlling the silos. Donald is beaten and punished, and it only worsens his already terrible condition, making him weaker. Thurman observes the events of Silo 18 and devices to terminate it, but before the gas can do any major damage, the tunneling is successfully done, and 200 people manage to make it to Silo 18. But there is yet another twist here because Donald was not working alone. He had woken up his sister Charlotte illegally, and she was among the people from the pre-Silo time kept in cryogenic sleep. She previously used to be in the army and her work involved bombings using drones. She had observed the silos as well by using the drones that she had access to. She gets help from another official named Darcy and gets Donald out of the prison to escape Silo 1. By now, Donald's condition had worsened, and he decided to stay back and set the charges inside Silo 1 so that the other silos would be saved. The destruction of Silo 1, according to me, marks a major event in the narrative even as Charlotte manages to make it out. Meanwhile, Juliet discovers that there are tunneling machines in all the silos that are supposed to connect to a place called the Seed. But the tunneling machine in the Silo 17 required more fuel to operate, so they decided to walk over to the Seed through the surface instead. As they emerge, they discover that the world has actually healed itself, and it was only around the silos that a cloud of dust, comprising of the nanobots, was enshrouding to kill anyone that comes out of them existed. But after a certain distance, there was clean water and air and even a thriving ecosystem for the people. But now the task is to rebuild the civilization, a task that would be helped by the Seed, a place filled with massive quantities of food and other resources in order to do the task. So yeah, the Seed is the seed that brings life back to the surface. That was always the intention. Charlotte and Juliet come together and work towards building the world back from the basics again. Yes, that's the entire story of Silo, particularly the arc that Juliet will be exploring along with other significant characters, particularly the likes of Donald and his sister and Thurman himself. Now, there are a lot of interesting character elements that are skipped here. For example, what happened in Silo 40 remains a mystery. In fact, Hugh Howey has indicated that he is working on an arc based around Silo 40 only, and maybe that could indicate that we will get a chance to explore what happened here in this silo in a spin-off to this series from Apple TV. Also, for the purpose of avoiding direct spoilers, I am not getting into the details of the ongoing third season, but I promise you, it is a fitting follow-up to the engaging story. I cannot wait to see how they end Season 3, and for those who just got familiar with this twisted world, make sure you check out the fascinating series because it will be surely worth your time. Let me know in the comments below if you have any interesting theory about the silos, and share your thoughts on the show in general. Also, if you appreciate the efforts to bring you this content, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more such videos.